All right, so 1 Kings chapter 6. Now we aren't going to read this more. You're going to be doing some writing here in your notes, as well as looking at the images that we have here. We're going to take a look at the design and the building of what we call Solomon's Temple. It's the Lord's Temple, but Solomon built it, and the reason that we kind of call it that is eventually when the people return from Babylon, they rebuild the city, and then it's King Herod's temple that is rebuilt, so that's another one that it's called, and that was different. The people back then lament the fact that Herod's temple was not as beautiful as Solomon's temple. And you have before you, what I've given you here, an image. The image is not accurate. Okay? There are lots of different images that you can go out onto the internet, or you can buy Bible books, and all of them look a little bit different because it's open to different interpretations. Okay? We don't know exactly where things were, exactly how it was laid out, but at least we can have some sense of the awe of the temple. So, lesson 33, the building of the temple, and it's based on 1 Kings chapter 6 and 7. Helpful if I got there too here. 1 Kings. So we're just going to pick and choose through a few things. So David had wanted to build the temple. His hands were too bloody. And the people of David's time were a warring people. They wouldn't have had the time to build it because they'd have been working, and then they would have had to have left to go fight the Philistines. And then they would have gone back to working, and then they would have had to run off and go fight the Ammonites. So it just didn't work out for David. The Lord wanted Solomon in a time of peace to be able to build them. Now we saw in our lessons before that out at the quarries, stones were being hewn and cut. And not just in some jagged, rough manner. Perfectly smooth, perfectly cubed or boxed in whatever shape they needed, so that when they arrived at the temple, they would not have to have any tools. They could just place these blocks in the walls and everything fit in just perfectly. The Lord had a plan there. Okay? God had been dwelling in the tabernacle since the people were wandering in the wilderness, since God had given that direction. In fact, the ark is not even in its proper place at that time. So, like we said, the temple was built in silent reverence. It's the house of God. So, no sound of any tools was heard there. They were smooth and cut out in the quarry by skilled men, or maybe somewhere just outside, and then they were placed. And we cannot imagine. We have huge cranes now that can lift up these things. These blocks were tons and tons and tons of weight. We think of other magnificent structures built back in those times. The pyramids. And you believe the Israelites had to help build them. Take these huge, large stones and wrap huge ropes around them, and maybe have hundreds of oxen and many people pulling them, putting log after log in front to act as a wheel to allow them to roll along, and then get them into place. And we just don't understand exactly how that could have been, but it was. It was. It took 160,000 men to prepare the stones for this temple. Now the size of it wasn't, well, we need to clarify. There you have in front of you a picture of the temple, right? So you have the temple, the actual building, okay? And then around that was an area, and then around the rest of that we would have another area. So when we're talking about the temple, this is what we're talking about. This structure right here. Okay? That is the temple. That's the main structure. These are courtyards that we'll talk about here in a little bit. So, the size of the actual temple, we might not think in today's standards very large, but very large back then for the people, very beautiful. It was 90 feet long from one end to the other end. It was 30 feet wide, okay, and then 45 feet tall. Okay, so a bunch of different measurements. 90 feet long, 45 feet tall, and 30 feet wide. That 30 feet is important because we know that this was, I didn't draw that here nice enough, but this, the Holy of Holies, we'll see is a perfect cube, 30 feet by 30 feet by 30 feet tall. Okay? So if this is 90 and you take away 30, that would leave this to be 60 and 30 wide, okay, and 45 feet tall. You know, you might say, how does that fit? Well, there must have been a false ceiling or an elevated floor. But if you walked into the room, if you measured from top to bottom, 30 by 30 by 30. Okay? So, those are some of the dimensions of the temple building. Which way did the doors face? They always faced to the east, just like the tabernacle. Why would they face to the east? The sun comes up. God's light would first shine every day through the passageways. When it was just coming over the horizon, God's light would shine into the temple. We ought to begin the day praising God, glorifying Him. And so, the temple and the tabernacle from before always faced to the east. Okay? Now, again, just talking about this building, if you walked up to that building, you would have faced some steps. Now again, looking on the image, we don't see any steps there. So again, that shows you that this is not completely accurate. But there would have been some steps that were 30 feet wide and 15 feet long and a great distance high. Okay? It was taller than the rest of everything else around it. Okay? And it had two doors in the front. These are folding doors, kind of like our closet doors. You can open them and they fold off to the sides. But what was amazing about all of that stuff is everything was covered in gold. And that's what you see there. Those doors, they are carved very beautifully. And we'll talk about those and see what they are carved with. But you go through the folding doors and you enter into this first room, what we call the holy place. Okay. 60 feet long by 30 feet wide, and again 45 feet tall. And then you would come to another set of golden double opening doors, and you'd have the Holy of Holies. Now we read that there's doors there. What I find interesting is we never read in the Bible any time of anything, those doors ever doing anything, really. Okay? There's a veil that's there, and we'll get to that, but those doors we don't see being used. But anyways, then if you walked into that room, which you would not have been allowed to do unless you were the high priest once a year, it would be 30 by 30 by 30. A perfect cube. Obviously, number 30, you could use that as a symbol. Divide by 10, you get 3. And 3 is the picture of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Okay, so it had a little bit of a lower ceiling, because this is 45 feet tall. This is 30 feet. So it probably had some type of dropped ceiling from above it. Okay? And then up above, and you see that on the image, most likely, we don't know what exactly was up on top of the temple, but most likely it was some type of flat roof, which was very typical in those days. The builders would have been able to do that. Okay? Then we come to the outside, what was around it. We read about some rooms. So, directly around the outside on 3 different walls, so we assume on these 3 walls here, we read about all of these rooms. Now again, this is where you have differences of opinions. Others said they would see them as being tiered, kind of like a step like this. So you'd have one room down here, and then another room, and then a third room like that. Okay? And then across, you'd have more tiers. We don't know exactly what it looked like, but we do know what they were used for. They were used to store different things. They may have been used for a place for the Levites and the priests to be able to sleep during their time there. Okay? So those rooms are around it. Probably a lot for storage, could have been used. We don't know. But we do know that they were probably some type of storage rooms. We just don't know if they look like this or a little bit different. But that's exactly what was around there. So you see that all around those rooms. Okay? They're used for storage. They may have been used for housing. Okay? Now, going back to the wood. Most of these walls and floors and doors and everything were first made out of wood. A wood carver then could beautifully carve images into them. Pomegranates, we read, and palm trees. Okay? Lilies, which were fruit, a flower. So, very beautifully carved. Cherubim, little angels were carved onto them. Okay? And then all of the wood was always covered in gold. So you could probably take that piece of wood and dip it into a vat of hot gold or have it poured over. We don't know exactly what process they used. But it was all overlaid with a thin layer of gold so that it shone beautifully. Okay? And that's how you get all that gold there inside the building. Everything is covered. But there was some wood that was used, and there were two types of woods that were used in the temple. Cedar and cypress. Two C words. Cedar and cypress. Cedar is known for its strong aroma, a sweet smelling aroma, and cedar is also, because it has that aroma and a chemical makeup, it keeps things like moths away. That's why grandma or mom may have a cedar chest in your home, their home, and you keep your precious belongings. Maybe something like a wedding dress is packed in there, because when you take clothing and pack it away for a long time, moths and other things can get in there. We read that in the Bible, where moth and rust doth corrupt. Okay? It will eat it away. So you want to save it, maybe put some mothballs, but put it in a cedar chest. The other wood, cypress, is well known because cypress is wood that does not rot in water. If you take any other piece of wood and throw it in water, it's going to eventually rot. Cypress trees are known, especially if we would head down to like the bogs of Louisiana. Cypress trees grow up out of the water. They don't rot. They don't die because of it. They're water resistant. So the wood here is used as cypress as well, because it is water resistant. It's not going, you don't have to worry about this temple rotting and falling apart because of old wood. It's made to last. Okay? Now, we talked about climbing up the steps and then entering into the holy place. Well, at the top of the steps were two important pillars, and they had names. The Lord gave them names. One was Boaz, and the other one was Jachin, Jachin. Jachin means he supports, meaning God. God supports his people. And Boaz meaning in his strength. So he supports in his strength. The Lord cares for his people. He supports this building with these pillars named Boaz and Jachin, and so does the Lord support us with his strength. And then again, everything covered in gold there. Pillars and steps and everything was covered with gold. What a beautiful thing to see. What a marvelous thing it would have been to have been able to see all that, to be a priest, even the high priest, so you can go into the Holy of Holies. Okay? Alright, now let's go. So we've seen the two pillars. We once again go up the steps into the holy place, and in the holy place, you see to the left and to the right, you see 5 candlesticks on each side, and each of those candlesticks would have 7 branches on them. Okay? 7 branches. 5 on this side, 5 on the other side, so 5 plus 5 would be 10. Okay? And then you've got 7 candlesticks in each of them. And obviously it being gold, if you lit all of those candles, the light in there would be beautiful. It would reflect off all of your surfaces because they're in a shiny gold. So you have plenty of light there from those. And then in the middle, you have the altar of incense. Okay, that would bring those sweet smelling smells up to the Lord. Okay? But also in there on each side, and that's again where the image here doesn't do justice, there would be, make that stop. You would have the tables of showbread, 10 tables covered in gold. Everything here is covered in gold. The table of showbread as well, with all that gold. Okay? Go away. Alright. So that's what you would find in there. So you can see beautiful walls with all kinds of carvings. 5 candlesticks, 5 candlesticks, each with 7 on them. candles that you could light. 10 tables of showbread, and in the middle, the altar of incense. You would take coals from the altar of burnt offering, and you would bring it over and pour it into the altar of incense, and it would bring that beautiful, sweet smelling savor up to the Lord. Okay? Now, you come to the next place, the Holy of Holies. We said there were doors in front, but they were always to the side. Can't remember, and I may be wrong, but I just can't remember a time in the Bible when they were closed. Maybe when we hear of some of the wicked kings closing up, maybe some of those were the doors that were also closed. But we don't read of them. And more importantly there, that we do read of in the Bible that plays a significant role, especially at the time of the death of Christ, is the veil. And this veil is beautiful. It's made out of blue and purple and crimson. And if I look here, and where is that here? Thought I had that, but well, it's made out of those beautiful colors. What I'm looking for here is speaking of the weight of it, because the weight of, you're used to probably by your windows, maybe some drapes. Maybe mom has some drapes, some type of covering, and you could easily just take a hand and move that way. That was not this veil. This veil was so thick and heavy, it took many men to be able to lift it up. Okay? It wasn't just some simple little veil that the wind would whip and blow around and everything else, but it was not. It was a very, very heavy veil. No man could just come up and move it all by himself. It took very many men to be able to hang it and get up there. So what makes it amazing is later when Christ dies and the veil of the temple is rent, the people who were around it, the people who saw it, know that this was not any chance thing that happened. This was no little accident. Somebody didn't come in there and do this on their own. This was the Lord at work when Christ died. The fact that the veil of the temple could be rent. Okay? And then in the Holy of Holies, what was special about it is, we said it's a perfect cube. Everything's covered in gold. In there would be the Ark of the Covenant. And on top of the Ark of the Covenant was, and again that's where I believe this image is wrong again, on top of the Ark of the Covenant you would have a mercy seat. And on top of the mercy seat were two cherubims. Okay? And those two cherubims would have wings that stretched forth. So you'd have, if you have a room that was 30 feet wide, bad marker. You'd have one set of wings and one would go here, and one set of wings and one will go here. So that from wingtip to this wingtip, the wall touched to this, from this wingtip to this wingtip, all the way across. So each set of wings would have been 15 feet wide, and since it's a set of wings, each wing would be probably about 7.5 feet wide. 7.5 feet, 7.5 feet, 7.5 feet, 7.5 feet, making a total of 30 feet. They would touch from wall to wall in here. Okay? The mercy seat. And that is, again, what a beautiful picture. And that covered over the ark. And obviously the mercy seat being there, that the high priest would go in once a year and sprinkle blood on that mercy seat in there. Okay? So that was beautiful. And again, everything would have been carved and ornate and very beautiful in there. Okay? But it was a perfect cube. Then, if we go outside, we have two important objects out there in that courtyard. Okay? And it was called the court of priests, because this is where the priests would do their work. This court would be the court of the people. That's where the people would go. But in here, the priests would go with the sacrifices of the people. And you had two objects there. You see on your image there, You have the altar of burnt offerings, a fire that was continually going. Okay. You would find the altar of burnt offerings there. It was 15 feet high, 30 feet square at its base. So there would have to be some way, and here you see it with solid stone. We read other places of a scaffold that Solomon would climb, and there they would be able to offer those animals on top of that altar of burnt offering, a picture of Christ eventually being offered. And then also you had the sea of brass. Okay? It was also called the molten sea, or a laver. Okay? That was in the tabernacle. It was 7.5 feet high and 45 feet in circumference. So 45 feet in circumference. This room is just about 30 feet wide. Okay? So when we talk about a little bit of math here, obviously, we know what diameter is. Okay? We know what circumference is. We know circumference is about pi times diameter. So we could figure out, well, divide 45 by 3, it would be about 15. So it's about 15 feet across. A huge, large thing of water. That's why it was called a sea. Okay? And what was interesting, what you see there is there were 3 oxen on every side holding it up. Obviously the 12 oxen total representing the 12 different tribes. Okay? So you have them all around this molten sea. And then you have smaller little lavers. Okay? We read again in the Bible about 10 small lavers of brass. They're on wheels so that they could easily be moved to the altar of burnt offering when needed, for the priests to wash their hands in, a picture of the washing away of sin. They want to get that blood out of there. So those 2 things were also out here in the court of the priests. Okay? And the court of the priests then would be bordered on 3 sides, and then you had another court. And this court too would be where the people would come. So when we imagine Jesus throwing out the buyers and the sellers, we imagine them probably all over here in the courts, and maybe even some of them in here in the court of the priests. But that's where Jesus would have been throwing them out of. So, and then out here too would be more storage rooms. There was things all around. Here's kind of a different example. Okay, you could have all different storage rooms around in it and everything. So the idea there being that that's where the people would come and go to bring their sacrifices, and they would bring them to the priests, and the priests would take them here to the altar of burnt offering, wash the animals, wash their hands in laver, and this obviously would be a special place for just the priests and the Levites to go. So it was a beautiful, magnificent building. Okay? It would be maybe a neat project to try to build a replica, but again, everything's kind of left up to interpretation. We don't know exactly. You could do a lot of research and look at what other artists who understand the Bible have done. You could maybe talk to some wise men, some ministers, or other men who spend time studying this to try to get an accurate representation, and yet we see that it's just not accurate. Just like we've got nowadays, if I would love to go visit the Ark Encounter down in Kentucky, where they've got the museum down there, Creation Museum. But the building, the boat, they've tried to make it accurate and size-wise, but its shape and everything, no one's really in agreement whether it's accurate or not. We'd say it was not built to be this boat-like vessel that needs to go anywhere, it just needs to float, more like a tub. But anyways, these are different representations that artists have done so we can appreciate their work and how they've tried to help us visualize what this all might have looked like, but yet knowing that each of them has their own small flaws in them. Okay? Before we finish, more important back then than we have today would have been the first stone that was laid. What was that called? Colin? The cornerstone. The most important stone laid in that building would have been the cornerstone, because all of the building, its direction and how it faced and its strength and how it was put together would have been based on that cornerstone. So it was very, very important for that to be done in the right manner and proper way. Okay? So, Jesus is our cornerstone. Right? The church is built on Christ. So, again, we don't have that today, but we can imagine that there was a great dedication ceremony that was done. And I'm sure when we finished putting an addition on this building, we'd have some more type of dedication ceremony, just like we had when this building was done. But that stone that was first laid would be the cornerstone. It's unfortunate that we don't have that anymore, because it's a beautiful picture for us of the church being built. You can't build the church without Christ. And so this temple could not have been built without an important cornerstone either. So save those images. Okay? Maybe put them in a Bible folder, because they'll be helpful.